Robert Chen watched his wife Linda pop champagne in their bedroom, celebrating his death with her 28-year-old personal trainer. 20 million in life insurance, she squealed, kissing Jake passionately in the bed Robert had bought for their anniversary. But Robert wasn't dead. He was watching everything through hidden cameras from a rundown apartment across Los Angeles, very much alive and documenting every betrayal. 3 weeks earlier, the self-made millionaire worth $43 million had faked his own bankruptcy and suicide, leaving behind detailed notes about losing everything to bad investments. His eldest son Michael's first reaction wasn't grief but greed. How fast can we get the insurance money? His daughter Sarah immediately quit her job and started selling family heirlooms. His youngest son David threw a party in the mansion, telling friends his father had finally done something useful by dying. Only his nephew Tommy, who had nothing to gain, searched the desert daily, spending his life savings on private investigators, refusing to believe Robert was gone. For 30 days, Robert watched his family reveal their true colors when they thought the money was gone and he was dead. What he discovered about who truly loved him versus who loved his wallet would shatter everything he believed about family, loyalty, and the price of unconditional love. The divorce papers sat on the marble kitchen counter next to Robert Chen's suicide note, both documents carefully staged for maximum impact when his family returned from their shopping spree at Rodeo Drive. But Robert wasn't dead. He was watching everything unfold through hidden cameras he'd installed throughout his Beverly Hills mansion, sitting in a modest apartment across town as his wife Linda discovered the letters that claimed he'd lost everything and couldn't face the shame. Her scream of joy, not anguish, but pure, unbridled joy, as she read about his supposed death would haunt him forever. Finally, she shouted to their eldest son Michael on speakerphone, "We don't have to wait for the old fool to die naturally. The insurance alone is worth $20 million. What Robert Chen, self-made millionaire and patriarch of what he'd believed was a loving family, discovered over the next 30 days while pretending to be bankrupt and disappeared, would shatter every illusion he'd ever had about love, loyalty, and the price people put on human connection. If you've ever wondered what the people closest to you would do if your money vanished tomorrow, if your success crumbled and all that remained was your humanity, then prepare yourself for a story that will make you question every relationship in your life. Hit that subscribe button and join the Acts of Depth family, because what Robert discovered about his own family will forever change how you see the difference between being valued and being loved. 6 weeks before his elaborate deception, Robert had been sitting in his doctor's office, receiving news that would catalyst everything that followed. At 58, he'd built a construction empire worth $43 million, starting from nothing as an immigrant who'd arrived in America with $200 and a willingness to work 20-hour days. The chest pains that had brought him to Dr. Martinez weren't a heart attack. They were panic attacks brought on by a creeping realization that had been building for months. "Your health is fine physically," Dr. Martinez had said, "but stress is eating you alive. When's the last time you took a vacation? Spent time with your family without talking about business?" The question had lingered because Robert couldn't answer it. His wife Linda spent more time with her personal trainer than with him. His eldest son Michael, 32, only called when he needed money for another failed business venture. His daughter Sarah, 28, was pleasant enough but treated him like an ATM with a pulse. His youngest David, 25, still lived at home, supposedly writing a novel but mostly playing video games and smoking pot in the pool house. The only family member who seemed to genuinely care about him was his nephew Tommy, his late brother's son, who worked as a junior foreman in Robert's company. Tommy regularly invited Robert to simple dinners at his cramped apartment, never asking for anything except stories about the old days and advice about work. But Linda always mocked these invitations. "Why would you waste time in that roach-infested apartment when we have a chef?" The breaking point had come at Robert's birthday dinner the previous month. He'd sat at the head of their massive dining table, watching his family talk around him, not to him. Linda discussed vacation plans with Sarah, using Robert's money, of course. Michael pitched David on a cryptocurrency scheme that needed just a small investment from Dad. Nobody asked Robert about his day, his thoughts, his dreams that extended beyond being their personal bank. That night, unable to sleep, Robert had walked through his mansion like a ghost haunting his own life. The walls were covered with family photos, vacations he'd paid for but barely remembered, celebrations where he'd stood in the background while his family enjoyed the fruits of his labor. In every picture, he looked tired. When had he become just a prop in their lives, necessary for the lifestyle but not the living? The plan had formed slowly, meticulous as any construction project he'd ever managed. He'd quietly liquidated certain assets, moving money to accounts his family didn't know existed. He'd rented a modest apartment in Koreatown under a fake name, paying cash for 6 months up front. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout the mansion during a supposed security upgrade, telling Linda it was for their protection. The hardest part had been writing the suicide note. Not emotionally, he felt oddly detached, but practically. It had to be believable enough to fool Linda, who'd watched enough crime shows to spot obvious fakes, but vague enough about the location of his supposed death that no one would search too hard. He'd claimed to have driven to the desert, to disappear where no one would find him, ashamed of losing everything to bad investments and unpaid taxes. The bankruptcy papers were easier to fake. He had a lawyer friend who owed him favors, someone who understood the need for the deception and promised to play along if anyone called to verify. Everything was dated, signed, and arranged to tell a story of catastrophic financial collapse, the kind that would leave his family with nothing but the house, which he'd supposedly reverse mortgaged, and their personal belongings. On the morning of his disappearance, Robert had kissed Linda goodbye as she lay in bed, barely conscious and murmuring about her noon Pilates class. He'd knocked on Michael's door, getting a gruff "go away" in response. Sarah had already left for her job at the art gallery, a job Robert had secured for her through connections. David hadn't come home the night before. Robert had driven to his secret apartment, set up his laptop to monitor the camera feeds, and waited. He'd sent a delayed email to Linda that would arrive at 3 p.m., simply saying, "Check the kitchen counter. I'm sorry, I love you all." Then he'd opened a beer, something Linda never let him drink because of the calories, and watched his life explode from a distance. Linda arrived home at 3:47 p.m., her arms full of shopping bags from Neiman Marcus, chattering on her phone to her sister about a spa weekend in Napa. She almost missed the papers entirely, setting her bags down on top of them before noticing the corner of Robert's note sticking out. The transformation of her face as she read was something Robert would replay in his mind for years to come. Confusion, shock, then that terrible, ecstatic joy when she reached the part about his supposed suicide. "Oh my God, Patricia, I have to call you back," she told her sister. But her voice was excited, not grief-stricken. She immediately dialed Michael. "Get home right now. Your father killed himself. He lost everything, but there's life insurance. 20 million in life insurance." Michael's response was equally telling. "Are you sure he's really dead? I mean, did anyone find a body? He says he went to the desert. Who cares? If he doesn't show up for a few weeks, we can have him declared dead. The insurance money will save us." Save them from what? Robert wondered. From the lifestyle he'd provided? From the mansion they lived in? From the cars he'd bought them? As far as they knew, they were now bankrupt. But their first thought wasn't grief. It was greed. Sarah arrived home an hour later, and her reaction was marginally better. She cried, but even through the pixelated camera feed, Robert could tell it was more shock than sorrow. "How could he do this to us?" she wailed. "How could he be so selfish? What are we supposed to do now?" David's response when he finally showed up at midnight, high as a kite, was perhaps the most honest. "Well, at least he can't lecture me about getting a job anymore." The family meeting the next morning was a masterclass in self-interest disguised as grief. Linda had already called her divorce lawyer, just to understand our options, and discovered that the bankruptcy would be handled separately from the life insurance. Michael had a spreadsheet open, calculating how to divide 20 million 4 ways. Sarah was on her phone looking at apartments in Paris. "I need to get away from all this tragedy." David just wanted to know if he could still keep the pool house. But then Tommy arrived. Robert's nephew, who'd somehow heard the news, came to the door with red eyes and shaking hands. Linda almost didn't let him in. "This is family only," she'd said coldly. But Tommy had pushed past her, desperate. "Where's the note? Where does it say he went? We have to look for him." "Tommy, he's gone," Michael said with fake sympathy. "We have to accept it." "No," Tommy shouted. "Uncle Robert wouldn't do this. He's the strongest man I know. Something's wrong. This doesn't make sense. Just last week he was talking about expanding the company, about teaching me everything he knows. He was excited about the future." "People hide their pain," Linda said, already practicing the lines she'd use at the memorial service she was planning, not to honor Robert, but to maintain appearances. "You don't understand," Tommy continued, tears streaming down his face. "He's the only real family I have left. After my dad died, Uncle Robert stepped up. He didn't just give me a job, he gave me purpose. He believed in me when no one else did. We have to find him." "He's gone, Tommy," Sarah said, putting a hand on his shoulder with the first genuine emotion she'd shown. "The note says he drove into the desert. Even if we wanted to search, it's thousands of square miles." Tommy collapsed into a chair, sobbing. It was the first real grief Robert had witnessed, and it broke something inside him. Here was his nephew, who had nothing to gain from Robert's death, who would actually lose his job when the company dissolved, showing more genuine pain than Robert's immediate family. Over the next week, Robert watched his life get systematically dismantled. Linda met with lawyers to file for death in absentia, frustrated by the waiting period required. Michael started liquidating Robert's remaining assets, his car collection, his watches, anything not tied up in the bankruptcy. Sarah quit her job, confident that her inheritance would set her up for life. David threw a party in the mansion, telling his friends his dad had finally done something useful. But Tommy kept searching. Robert watched through traffic cameras and social media as his nephew drove to the desert every day after work, searching the roads Robert might have taken. He put up missing person posters. He hired a private investigator with his own savings. He refused to believe Robert was gone. The memorial service, held 2 weeks after the disappearance, was a study in contrasts. Linda wore designer black and gave a speech about a complicated man who provided for his family until the end. She actually said provided, not loved, not cherished, but provided. Michael talked about his father's business acumen and how he planned to honor his memory by starting his own company with the insurance money. Sarah read a generic poem she'd found online. David didn't even speak, too busy texting during the service. Tommy, though, stood at the podium and spoke from the heart. "Robert Chen wasn't just my uncle. He was my mentor, my father figure, my friend. He taught me that success isn't measured in money, but in the lives you touch. He showed up for me when no one else would. He gave me chances when I didn't deserve them. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Uncle Robert, if somehow you can hear this, know that you mattered. Not your money, not your success, but you. You mattered to me." The breaking point came 3 weeks into Robert's disappearance when he watched Linda bring home her personal trainer, Jake, for what was clearly not the first intimate encounter in Robert's own bedroom. Through the hidden camera, Robert watched his wife of 30 years pour champagne in the bed they'd shared, toasting to new beginnings with a 28-year-old man who drove the Porsche Robert had bought Linda for her last birthday. The casualness of their conversation revealed this affair had been going on for at least a year. "Once the insurance comes through, we can finally be together publicly," Linda said, running her fingers through Jake's hair. "I've wasted so many years on Robert. He was always at work, always tired, always talking about responsibility and family values. He never understood that life is meant to be enjoyed." "20 million buys a lot of enjoyment," Jake replied, and they both laughed. Robert turned off the feed, unable to watch more. He sat in his sparse apartment, surrounded by the simple furniture he'd bought from a thrift store, and wondered how he'd been so blind. The signs had been there: Linda's sudden interest in fitness, her new wardrobe, the way she'd stopped asking about his day years ago. He'd attributed it to a midlife crisis, had even been happy she'd found a hobby. The fool he'd been. Meanwhile, the family's true colors continued to reveal themselves in increasingly shocking ways. Michael had started approaching Robert's business partners, suggesting he could take over the company if they'd invest, claiming he'd learned everything from his father, but could run things more efficiently without the old man's outdated ethics. One partner, James Liu, had called Tommy instead, concerned about Michael's aggressive tactics and questionable legal proposals. "Your cousin is suggesting we cook the books," James told Tommy in a conversation Robert watched through Tommy's apartment security camera. He'd hacked into it, feeling guilty but needing to know everything. He says Robert was too conservative, that there are ways to triple profits if we're willing to bend some rules. "I'm not interested in going to prison." Tommy's response had been immediate and fierce. "My uncle built this company on integrity. If Michael contacts you again, record everything and send it to me. I won't let him destroy what Uncle Robert spent his life building." Sarah's degradation was subtler but no less disappointing. She'd started selling off family heirlooms, things she'd claimed were too painful to keep, but Robert recognized as simple greed. His mother's jade bracelet, brought from China 70 years ago, went for $8,000 on an auction site. The first edition books Robert had collected, each one carefully chosen and read, were sold in bulk to a dealer. Even family photos were being evaluated for their frame value. But it was David who surprised Robert the most, not with disappointment, but with unexpected depth. One night, Robert watched his youngest son sit in the study, holding Robert's old construction helmet from his first job site. David was drunk, talking to the helmet as if it were Robert himself. "You know what the fucked up thing is, Dad? I actually miss you. Not your money, not the safety net, but you. You were the only one who actually gave a damn if I made something of myself. Mom just wanted me to not embarrass her. Michael thinks I'm a loser. Sarah treats me like a child. But you kept pushing because you believed I could be better. And I hated you for it. But at least you cared enough to be disappointed." David had then pulled out a manuscript from his backpack, the novel he'd been supposedly writing. "I finished it, Dad. The day after you died, I was going to show you to prove I could finish something. It's about a son who doesn't realize what he has until it's gone. I guess life imitates art, huh?" Through all of this, Tommy continued his relentless search. He'd taken time off work, spending his savings on expanding the search area. He'd contacted homeless shelters, hospitals, morgues, anywhere Robert might have ended up. He'd even started a social media campaign, #FindRobertChen, that had gained modest traction. Local news had picked up the story. Nephew refuses to give up hope for missing uncle. The private investigator Tommy hired, a former cop named Marcus Washington, was competent and thorough, too thorough. He'd started noticing inconsistencies in the suicide note, questioning why a man planning to die would bother with such detailed bankruptcy paperwork. Robert watched through Tommy's laptop camera as Marcus presented his findings. "Your uncle's credit cards were all canceled the day before his disappearance, but one new account was opened at a different bank, paid in cash. The bankruptcy filing has some irregularities, technically correct, but unnecessarily complex for someone planning to die. And there's this. Security footage from a gas station 30 miles from where he supposedly went shows someone matching his description buying supplies. But the video quality is too poor to be certain." "So you think he's alive?" Tommy asked, hope crackling in his voice. "I think something doesn't add up. Either your uncle is more complicated than you knew, or someone's not telling the whole truth." Robert realized his plan was unraveling. Tommy's determination was going to expose him, and while part of him wanted to be found by the one person who truly cared, he wasn't ready. He needed to see how this played out, needed to know the full truth about his family. That's when Linda made her move. With the help of her lawyer, she filed a petition to have Robert declared legally dead, citing his depression, the suicide note, and the financial collapse as evidence. But she needed family unity to push it through quickly. She called a family meeting, and Robert watched the negotiation unfold like a business deal. "If we all sign the petition, we can have him declared dead within 60 days instead of waiting years," Linda explained. "The insurance pays out, we sell the mansion, and we all walk away with enough to start over." "What about the company?" Michael asked. "There are contracts, employees, obligations." "The company dies with Robert. The bankruptcy ensures that. Tommy and the others will have to find new jobs. But that's not our problem. Tommy stood up at the family meeting, his face flushed with anger. Not your problem? There are 43 employees who depend on that company. Uncle Robert spent 30 years building it. You're just going to let it die? It's already dead, Michael said coldly. Without Dad's connections and reputation, it's worthless. The contracts will default, the clients will leave. Better to liquidate now than drag it out. I could run it, Tommy said suddenly. I know the business. The foremen respect me. We could restructure, take on smaller projects, keep people employed. Linda laughed, a harsh sound that made Robert wince through the camera feed. You? You're 26 years old with a community college degree. You think clients will trust you with million-dollar projects? Uncle Robert trusted me, Tommy shot back. He was grooming me to take over eventually. He told me so. He told everyone what they wanted to hear, Linda said dismissively. That was his weakness, always trying to make people feel special. Look where it got him. The room went silent for a moment, and then David spoke up unexpectedly. I won't sign it. Everyone turned to stare at him. David, the perpetual disappointment, the stoner who lived in the pool house, was taking a stand. What do you mean you won't sign? Linda demanded. I mean, I won't declare Dad dead just so you can cash in faster. If he's really gone, waiting a few months won't matter. If he's not, David paused, looking directly at a hidden camera he couldn't possibly know was there. If he's not, then he deserves to know that at least one of his kids isn't a complete piece of shit. You're high, Michael said dismissively. You'll sign when you sober up and realize you need the money. Actually, I haven't smoked in 2 weeks, David replied. Since Dad died, it didn't feel right anymore. And I got a job. Nothing fancy, just bartending, but it's honest work. Dad would have liked that. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. David's right about one thing. It does feel wrong rushing to declare him dead. What if Tommy's investigator is onto something? What if Dad is out there somewhere, hurt or confused? Then where is he? Linda snapped. Why hasn't he contacted us? Why would he do this to his family? Maybe, Tommy said quietly, he wanted to see who would look for him. The words hung in the air, and Robert felt exposed, as if Tommy could see through the cameras, through the deception, straight into his hidden apartment. His nephew had always been perceptive, but this was uncanny. Linda's phone rang, breaking the tension. It was Jake, and she stepped outside to take it, but not before Robert heard her say, Yes, baby, the meeting's almost over. I'll be there soon. While she was gone, Tommy pulled out a folder. I've been going through Uncle Robert's papers at the office. Look at this. He spread out documents on the table. Charity donations, employee assistance programs, college funds Robert had quietly set up for workers' children. This is who he really was. Not the money, not the success, but this. He helped people. He helped strangers, Michael said bitterly. He paid for other kids' college while lecturing me about responsibility. Because you dropped out 3 times, Sarah said, and he still paid each time. The siblings began arguing, years of resentment surfacing. Michael accused Sarah of coasting on their father's connections. Sarah shot back that at least she'd finished school. David called them both hypocrites. Tommy tried to mediate, but nobody was listening. That's when Marcus Washington, the private investigator, arrived at the door. Linda, returning from her call, tried to block him, but he pushed past with an authority that suggested he'd found something significant. I've been investigating your husband's disappearance, Mrs. Chen, and I've discovered some interesting facts. He pulled out his tablet, showing bank records. 3 large cash withdrawals in the weeks before his disappearance. A storage unit rented under a corporate name that traces back to him. And this, he showed a grainy photo, a man matching Robert's description at a Korean restaurant in LA, taken 5 days ago. Robert's blood ran cold. He'd been careless, venturing out for comfort food from his childhood, thinking the small family restaurant would be safe. But someone had recognized him, or at least noticed the resemblance. That could be anyone, Linda said quickly. Lots of Asian men look similar to people who... Don't finish that sentence, Tommy warned, his voice dangerous, and look closer. That's Uncle Robert's watch. The one you couldn't find to sell, Sarah. Sarah peered at the photo, her face paling. Oh my God, is Dad alive? I believe so, Marcus said. The question is why he's hiding and what he's waiting for. Linda sank into a chair, but her expression wasn't relief. It was calculation. Robert could see her mind working, figuring out the implications. No life insurance, no freedom with Jake, no escape from a marriage she clearly despised. We need to find him, she said finally, but her tone was more threat than concern. Why? David asked. So you can divorce him and take half of nothing? Because according to these bankruptcy papers, that's all that's left. There has to be more, Michael insisted. Dad wouldn't leave us with nothing. He's hiding money somewhere. Or, Tommy said slowly, he's testing us, seeing who we really are when we think he's gone. Everyone turned to look at him again, and this time the silence was deafening. The truth of it settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Each of them began to replay their actions over the past 3 weeks, seeing themselves through Robert's potential eyes. The confrontation came the next morning, but not in the way Robert had planned. Tommy showed up at his apartment door at 6 a.m. alone, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of profound sadness rather than anger. Robert stood frozen in the doorway, unable to maintain his deception in the face of his nephew's knowing eyes. The coffee's the way you like it, Tommy said simply. Black, no sugar, even though Aunt Linda always insisted you take it with cream. Can I come in? Robert stepped aside wordlessly, and Tommy entered the sparse apartment, taking in the simple furniture, the laptop displaying the camera feeds, the pile of notebooks where Robert had been documenting everything he'd observed. Tommy set the coffees down and turned to face his uncle. I've known for 3 days, Tommy said quietly. The investigator traced the storage unit, found the apartment lease. I told him to stop investigating, paid him off. I've been trying to figure out what to do. Why didn't you expose me? Robert asked, his voice rough from 3 weeks of barely speaking. Because I wanted to understand why. And I think I do now. Tommy gestured to the laptop showing the mansion's empty rooms. You needed to know if anyone would miss Robert the person, not Robert, the bank account. Robert sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. And the answer is devastating. Not entirely, Tommy said. David's been different. He got a job, stopped smoking, even started visiting your mother's grave. Sarah's been volunteering at the community center. She said you always wanted the family to give back. She's teaching art to kids who can't afford classes. And Linda? Tommy's silence was answer enough. She's planning to file for divorce the moment you surface, Tommy finally said. Jake already moved half his stuff into the pool house. Michael's been trying to steal your client list, but James, Lou, and the others want nothing to do with him. They're waiting, hoping you'll come back. Robert pulled out one of his notebooks, filled with observations. I have everything documented. Every conversation, every betrayal, every moment of truth. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but I just feel empty. You're mourning, Tommy said gently. Not their betrayal, but the family you thought you had. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee, 2 men bonded by something deeper than blood, genuine affection and respect. There's something else, Tommy said, something you should see before you decide what to do. He pulled out his phone, showing a video. It was from the previous night, taken at the mansion. David was in Robert's study, talking to Michael and Sarah. We need to talk about Dad, David was saying. Really talk. Not about money or the house or any of that shit. About him. What's there to talk about? Michael asked. He's gone. No, he's not, David said firmly. I don't mean physically. I mean we never really saw him when he was here. Do you know what his favorite movie was? What he wanted to be before he got into construction? Do you know he wrote poetry in Chinese that he never showed anyone? How do you know that? Sarah asked. Because I found his journals while packing his study. 30 years of thoughts we never bothered to ask about. Dreams we never knew he had. Fears he never felt safe sharing. We lived with a stranger because we were too selfish to know him. It's too late now, Michael said, but his voice lacked its usual coldness. Is it? David looked directly at the camera. Dad, if you're watching this somehow, if you're out there, I want you to know something. I found your letter, the real one, the one you wrote but never sent. The one where you said you felt like a ghost in your own life. I'm sorry. We did that to you. I did that to you. Robert's hands shook as he watched. What letter? Tommy pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. David found this in your desk. It's dated 6 months ago. Robert read his own forgotten words, written during a particularly dark night when Linda had forgotten his birthday and his children hadn't called. It was a goodbye letter he'd never sent, a confession of loneliness that had predicted everything that followed. David's been carrying it everywhere, Tommy said. He reads it to Michael and Sarah every day, trying to make them understand. Sarah broke down yesterday. She said she'd been so focused on what you could do for her that she never thought about what she could do for you. And Michael? Michael's harder to read, but he hasn't touched the client list in 3 days. He's been sitting in your office at the company, staring at your photo. The security guard says he heard him talking to it, apologizing. Robert stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up. It's too late for Linda and me. That's clear. But not for your kids, Tommy said. They're flawed, selfish, and spoiled. But they're also young enough to change. The question is whether you want to help them change or just punish them for who they've been. What would you do? Robert asked. Tommy considered carefully. I'd go back. Not as the same Robert Chen who left. He was enabling them, funding their dysfunction. But as someone who demands better, who sets boundaries, who teaches them that money is the least important thing you can give your children. Robert's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but he recognized David's writing style. Dad, if you get this, I'm at Mom's grave. I go every morning now. I tell her about you, about us, about how we failed you. She would be ashamed of us, but she'd also want us to do better. Come home, not to the mansion, but to us. We need to learn who you really are. Sarah had added her own message. I sold your things. I can't undo that, but I kept one thing, your first hard hat. Tommy told me it represents who you really are. A builder. Build us into a better family. Please. Even Michael had written, though his message was typically brief. I was wrong. About everything. They don't know I'm alive for certain, Robert said. No, but they hope. That hope is changing them more than your death ever could. Robert made his decision. He pulled out his real phone, the one registered to his name, and typed a simple message to his children. Meet me at Tommy's apartment. Come alone, no lawyers, no recording devices, just us. It's time for truth. Within an hour, they were all there. David, Sarah, and Michael, looking nervous and hopeful in Tommy's small living room. Robert entered without fanfare, wearing the same simple clothes he'd worn for 3 weeks, no longer the polished millionaire they'd known. Dad? Sarah whispered, tears already flowing. I've been watching you, Robert said simply. All of you. I know everything. The affairs, the greed, the celebrations of my supposed death. But I also saw the changes, the regret, the humanity you found when the money disappeared. It was a test, Michael said. Not a question, but a statement. It was survival, Robert corrected. I was dying inside that mansion, being a wallet instead of a father. So I chose to disappear and see if anyone would miss me, not my money. I missed you, David said firmly. Not at first. At first, I was relieved. But then I realized the only person who ever expected anything from me was gone. And that expectation, as much as I hated it, meant you saw potential in me. We all failed, Sarah said. We failed as a family. We did, Robert agreed, including me. I thought providing meant loving. I thought money could substitute for presence. I was wrong. So what now? Michael asked. Now we rebuild. But not the old way. The mansion is being sold. That's not a lie. Linda and I are divorcing. She's made that clear through her actions. The company will be restructured with Tommy as partner, not because he's family, but because he's earned it. Each of you will receive a modest trust, enough to survive, but not enough to avoid working. If you want more, earn it. That's fair, David said immediately. More than fair, Sarah agreed. Michael struggled, but finally nodded. Will you teach me? Really teach me the business, not just give me a position? If you're willing to start at the bottom, yes. And Mom, Sarah asked, your mother made her choices. She'll receive what the law requires, nothing more. What relationship you have with her is your decision. Over the following months, Robert's resurrection became the talk of Beverly Hills, but he no longer cared about reputation. He moved into a modest house near the ocean, close enough to be involved with his children, but far enough to maintain boundaries. David published his novel to moderate success and started his second. Sarah opened her own art therapy practice for underprivileged youth. Michael surprisingly thrived starting at the bottom of the company, earning his colleagues' respect through hard work rather than nepotism. Linda fought the divorce bitterly, but ultimately accepted a settlement that left her comfortable but not wealthy. She married Jake within a month of the divorce finalizing. They divorced a year later when the money ran out. Tommy became not just Robert's business partner, but the son he'd always wanted, someone who valued the work, the legacy, and the man behind it all. The Acts of Depth family knows that sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. If Robert's story made you think about your own relationships, about whether you're valued or just valuable, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and remember, the people who look for you when you have nothing to offer are the only ones worth keeping when you have everything to give. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't in your bank account, but in discovering who genuinely loves you when the vault is empty.